channel. Today is episode number 4 of our Fish in a Tree Read Aloud series, and we are on chapter number 8. And if you remember back to what we read before, Allie, our main character, unfortunately doesn't know how to read. So her life is pretty hard. She's running into a lot of struggles. Her teacher didn't understand, her parent doesn't understand, her brother doesn't know, nobody knows except for Allie, and now she has a new teacher. So we're about to find out if that new teacher is good for Allie's problem or if he's going to make it worse. Let's find out. Chapter 8, Real Trouble. The first day with Mr. Daniels starts out okay because we have math in the morning and Mr. Daniels does this thing he calls bus driver. He says, "You're the bus driver." And then he tells us how many people get on and off and we have to add and subtract the numbers in our head. No paper, no pencils, just math. When I was younger, I loved math, everything about math. But in school, now math has letters. Well, that sounds a lot like our algebra unit. Like, what does X equal? There's also long stories with characters, and although the story is supposed to end with some number, all the words block my path to getting there. But the day turns into a wood nickel day at snack time when Mr. Daniels calls me up to his desk. He holds the assignment that I did for Mrs. Hall where we had to describe ourselves, the one with Y written all over the page. My stomach turns a flip. "So I'm wondering what this means exactly. Can you tell me?" he said. I shrug. "I'm wondering if you can just write one paragraph for me. Something about you. I'd like to learn something about you, Allie." I stay quiet. With teachers, if you stay quiet long enough, they start doing the talking for you, filling in the answers, and then all you have to do is nod and play along, so I wait. But he waits too. Finally, he says, "Come on now, can you write that paragraph for me?" I feel heavy. "No," I say. He doesn't want to know about the real me. It'll be like people in scary movies who think they want to know what's in the basement, but when they find out, they're always sorry. "Allie, did you say no?" he said without being mad. I turn myself into stone. He takes a deep breath and leans forward. "So, is it writing that you don't like?" I think about saying no, except it could cause me some trouble later though. Like the chess game in Grandpa Alice in Wonderland book. You have to be super sure before you make a move, for sure, but I figure Mr. Daniels probably already knows what this is about, so I nod. "What do you like then?" "Buffalo wings," I say. He laughs a little bit. "What do you like about school?" "Leaving." He waits for me to say more. "I like math, and I like art, and I really like to draw." "Oh, well, that's cool. Do you draw a lot?" "Yeah." "So do you find the writing difficult, or do you just not like it?" "It's easy. It's just boring," I lie. "Well, maybe we can do some things to make it less boring for you, to excite you about the writing. It's a great way to explore, be creative, ask lots of questions." I point at my paper. "I asked lots of questions here." "Yeah," he said. "I guess you did." He takes a deep breath. "Here's the thing, Allie. I'm going to be honest with you. I've talked with both Miss Hall and Mrs. Silver. I know that you've spent a lot of time in the office in the past. You're good at getting sent to the office, but you know, you can be too good at the wrong things." Uh-oh. "I just want you to know that I'm going to try really hard not to send you to the office. If we have something to deal with, you and I will deal with it together." He winks. "What happens in room 206 stays in room 206. "What?" I think. "So we won't involve Mrs. Silver anymore, okay? I think she has enough to do around here." "Oh no, did he just take away my get out of jail free card?" "Also," he says, moving his head to look me in the eye, "I'm on your side, okay? I want to help you." So he wants to help me, huh? He has no idea what he's in for. Chapter 9, A Bag Full of Nothing. Today, we're supposed to bring in something that represents us and tell the class about it. I thought of a few things I could bring, like a can full of dirt or a bag full of nothing. Mr. Daniels asked for volunteers to go first. Shock of the century when Shay raises her hand. Of course, right? She gets up there with a picture of her horse, Diamond. She goes on and on about how she loves him and how she goes riding several times a week and how it's a lot of work to take care of him. And she shows us her riding helmet and her fancy riding jacket too. I guess there really isn't anything that she doesn't have. Jessica brings a picture of Shay and talks about what good friends they are, which I think is kind of weird, considering we're supposed to talk about ourselves. Oliver bounces to the front of the room. His feet are never on the floor at the same time. It's like he takes out a light bulb. "I am the giver of light," he says. "Really?" Mr. Daniels says. "Well, my dad is. He sells lamps. And when I grow up, I'm going to be a salesman too. I'm going to sell hangers." "Hangers?" Mr. Daniels says. "Yeah, because I was thinking that it should be something that everyone has, because you'd want to sell the stuff that people need, right? Because if you sold stuff that nobody wanted, you wouldn't sell anything, right? And then everybody needs hangers, so I would always have a job." Mr. Daniels smiles and puts his hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Oliver, you're one clever boy, you know that?" I haven't been in school that long, but I'm gonna guess that Oliver hasn't heard that said to him much. He falls into his chair, which tips back, but he grabs his desk, rights himself, and cheers for his own victory. Albert gets up next. As always, he wears the shirt with Flint on it and his bruises on his arms. He reaches into a brown paper lunch bag and pulls out a jar of clear liquid. He clears his throat. This is a mixture of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen molecules. 2 parts hydrogen. You should know what that is. "Will it explode?" yells Oliver. Albert does not answer. Instead, he unscrews the metal lid and takes a drink of whatever it is. I'm silently freaked out, but Oliver goes nuts. "He drank it! Did you see that? He drank molecules! Gross!" "It's just water." Hope you knew that. "It's just water," Albert says. While Mr. Daniels speaks to Albert, Shay whispers to Jessica, "Water? Really? That's all he brought?" Shay has gotten even better at being mean. Ever since Mr. Daniels kept her in for recess for making fun of Oliver, she saves her comments for when Mr. Daniels is busy talking to someone else. "This water was taken from a giant underground lake that goes on for miles," Albert says. "It's the same water that dinosaurs walked through 100 million years ago, and that the caveman drank. It's the same water that polar bears swam in just last year, and medieval knights guzzled after battle." Oliver and most of the other boys stand, trying to get a better look. "That's cool, Albert," Max says. "Where did you get it?" Jessica and Shay smile and lean forward to look at it. "Max?" Shay calls out. "Yeah, Albert. Where did you get it?" "I got it from my kitchen faucet." "Huh?" "The same water has been here and been reused since the day Earth began. It's important to me because as a scientist and as a historian, I know that we are but a blip on Earth's timeline, a grain of sand on an entire beach of time." Kids are starting to groan. "Here goes the professor again," Max says. "Yeah, such a show-off," Jessica says, turning to Max. "Knock it off," Mr. Daniels says. "I think Albert's idea is true and fascinating. How Earth has recycled its water over and over. Extraordinary job, Albert." Next, he calls on Keisha. She carries a small box and holds it like whatever inside will break really easily. When she takes out a cupcake, the boys argue about who will get to eat it. "This is a cupcake that I made. It isn't from a box mix. It's homemade." "And why is that important to you?" Mr. Daniels says. "I like to bake. I told my mom that I want to start a business when I get older. And she said there's no time like the present. So this is the first one. I'll show it to anyone outside of my own family." "My gosh," Shay whispers. She acts like she's the first one to actually make a cupcake. It's not even decorated or anything. "Shay, please keep your comments positive," Mr. Daniels says. "Yes, it is plain on the outside," Keisha says, half smiling at Shay, "but it's the inside that matters." Keisha takes a knife out of her box and cuts the cupcake in half and shows us the inside. As you can see, it says "Yum" on the inside. "How did you do that?" people say. I'm surprised to hear some of them talk. Some of them hardly say anything. "I've been experimenting with making letters out of different kinds of cupcake dough. I stand the letters up in the batter and carefully cover them with more batter so that they bake in the shape of the letters." "Do you lick the spoon when you're done?" Oliver asks. "I like to lick the spoon, but my mom says it's too much sugar and that it isn't good for me, so she doesn't bake much because—" "Oliver," Mr. Daniels says, pulling on his own ear. Oliver stops right away. Then Mr. Daniels looks at the cupcake. Wow, Keisha, that is pretty impressive. I'm going to call my baking business Hidden Messages, the badder way to send a note. That's a fantastic idea, Keisha, Mr. Daniels says. The possibilities are endless. Albert raises his hand and Mr. Daniels points to him. The possibilities are not, in fact, endless, as she would eventually run out of appropriate letter combinations, and the number of letters to be used in each cake would be very limited as well. Also, you imply that the possibilities are all positive when it's probable that the possibilities would equal in positive and negative outcomes. Actually, you're right, Albert, Mr. Daniels says, but I'm an optimist. What can I say? So you agree that the possibilities aren't endless? He says. Well, I agree from a mathematical standpoint, Albert, but not from a human one. I believe that the things we put numbers on are not necessarily the things that count the most. Like, you can't measure the stuff that makes us human, like Keisha's creativity or how hard she'll work. Mr. Daniels shrugs. It's just my opinion. Well, it seems that the part that can't be measured is most important, Albert says, because that's what can't be proven. Well, my fine young man, I think we'll have to agree to disagree, Mr. Daniels says, walking by Albert and patting him on the shoulder. Then Mr. Daniels calls on Suki. She pulls out tiny paper bags and begins to pass them out to everyone. I brought 2 foods to share. One is a homemade food, my grandfather's favorite. The other is wasabi peas. They are very spicy. Food in America tastes... She turns to Mr. Daniels. What's the correct word? All of a sudden, Max jumps up and runs to the sink, followed by Keisha and Jessica. Too hot! Max yells. The 3 push each other a bit, trying to scoop water quickly into their mouths. Oh, yeah, Suki continues. Bland was the word I was looking for. Food here is kind of bland. She seems to think that the 3 kids at the sink are both funny and weird. I think how hard it would be to move to a different country and have to learn a whole nother language. I can't even handle one. Mr. Daniels laughs, holding the little bumpy bright green bean looking thing between his fingers. They don't look that hot. Most people in the class are too chicken to eat it now after seeing those kids' reactions and end up pushing it away. Suki looks a little bit sad because of it. Albert puts one in his mouth. He eats it, but he looks like he's in pain. His eyes even start to water. He says with a gasp, "Oh, I like it, Suki. Thank you." Albert is nice. Oliver pops one in his mouth, but he has no even reaction. Oliver, Mr. Daniels says, you don't think it's too spicy? Nah, I'm the only one in my family that can finish a whole Fireball candy without taking it out of my mouth. My mother says that I must have no taste buds at all. And my dad says, Mr. Daniels pulls on his earlobe again and says, thank you, Oliver, that's enough. Oliver's mouth is open, ready to keep going, but he says, thanks, Mr. Daniels. Do they have some signal or something? Suki continues, these foods mean much to me because I share them with my grandfather. Many things about Japan I miss, but grandfather I miss most. Also, I miss wood carving with him. He makes me wooden blocks and I carve for him and I send him gifts. So that's why she has those blocks always. I eat these foods because they remind me of Japan and my grandpa. I feel sad for her. What are those crackers made of? Asks Albert. Suki turns to him. They are made of shrimp and fish bones. It isn't just Oliver who goes wild over that one. Most everyone says, ew, gross. And Suki looks up at Mr. Daniels, who turns to the class and says, now, quiet down. Shrimp and fish bones, Shay says. We prefer lobster in our family. Albert raises his hand. I would just like to point out that lobster is very expensive. But in the olden days, it was served only to peasants and slaves who revolted and demanded that they only be served lobster twice a week. And I think fish bones would have some excellent nutritional properties. Suki gives a little smile for a second before she scurries back to her seat. Mr. Daniels gives Albert a solid nod. Next, it's my turn. What I ended up bringing in means something to me, but now I'm not sure that the class would even be nice about it. I decide to play it safe and say that I forgot. I can tell Mr. Daniels is disappointed. Well then, do you have a pet you can tell us about? He says. No, my mom is allergic. This reminds me of my dad crawling around the living room on all fours pretending to be the puppy that I begged for so long. Oliver starts to bark like a dog. Mr. Daniels says, "Too much of that, Oliver, and we'll have to start giving you dog biscuits. Better be careful." Mr. Daniels squints at me. "Are you sure there's nothing you can show us?" he says, "because I have a feeling there's something." I slide my hand down into my pocket and clutch my 1943 steel penny that I brought. He watches my hand, and I realize that I've given myself away, so I stand up and I take out the penny. My dad is in the Army, and he's deployed right now. On the day that my dad left, he gave Travis, my brother, and me these pennies. I look up at Mr. Daniels. "That's my big brother." He nods. In 1943, pennies looked weird because they were silver in color like quarters. They were made of steel instead of copper because the government needed copper to make gunpowder and ammunition during World War II. Then, in 1944, pennies went back to the way they were. Anyway, I think it's kind of cool. "I do too," Mr. Daniels says, "and I think it's even more cool that you told us about it." As I walk back to my seat, I think about how when Dad left, he said that when we look at the steel pennies, we need to remember that we're unique too, and also that things will go back to normal for us, and that he'll be home before we know it. I really miss him. Mr. Daniels gives Oliver a thumbs up, and I think how cool it is that they have that ear-pulling signal. That way he doesn't always have to tell Oliver that he's doing something wrong in front of everybody. I know what that feels like, and I'm happy that Mr. Daniels cares so much. Some teachers seem to like their students to be all the same, perfect and quiet. But Mr. Daniels actually seems to like the fact that we're all different. And that's where I'm going to stop. So, things seem promising for Mr. Daniels. I think he is going to be a pretty good teacher. He kind of reminds me of Mr. Tariff. You remember when we read that book? He kind of seems like that different, special sort of teacher like Mr. Tariff. So, when you come back next time, we're going to be on chapter 10, and that chapter is called Promises, Promises. So, when you come back, we'll find out what those promises are. See you next time. Bye!